So we're going to be looking at question 50 today from the SAT number 17, April 2019 QAS test. And question 50 says, which statement best describes the relationship between the two passages? So we're asking about basically the big relationship that we have between these two different passages. This is on the paired passages. So whenever we get a question like this, which sort of talks about the big picture between the two different paired passages, I really can't think of any other way to solve these other than understanding the argument pretty decently and be able to do most of the work in your head. So normally the way paired passages work is they focus less on the level of specific detail like some of the other passages do, and they focus more on the level of the argument. So if you have a good handle and a good understanding of each of the arguments from either passage, it becomes a little bit easier to sort of do this work in your head. Otherwise, you're going to be going back and rereading and scanning, and it's going to be hard to find specific evidence for it. So let's start with this. We want to describe the overall relationship between the two passages. So we have passage 1 and passage 2. So what we should have a decent understanding of is that passage 1 primarily talks about the impact hypothesis, and it talks favorably about it. It presents that as the view. Passage 2, in contrast, pretty much just shits on passage 1. That's pretty much what it does, and it just goes through the evidence. It says, here's why the evidence is not so good, here's different evidence, etc., etc. So that's the relationship between them. Passage 1 presents a claim. Passage 2 pretty much says, here's why that claim is wrong. So let's go through and see if we can sort of find it. It might be more nuanced than just positive, negative, but let's look and see what we have. So we have A says, passage 2 presents a critique of the central hypotheses described in passage 1. This to me seems pretty much perfect. It's very general. It's not making a very specific or nuanced claim. All it's saying is that passage 2 says no to the hypothesis of passage 1, which is what is going on. So let's keep it. B says passage 2 explains the scientific question addressed by the central hypothesis developed in passage 1. So this is more specific, but it's not going to be our answer choice because this is really not what's going on in the two passages. So this would be true if maybe passage 1 is looking at the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, and then passage 2, what it's doing is it's explaining the scientific question. So all it's doing is explaining, hey, here's a question about why did the Earth all of a sudden get cool 13,000 years ago, and the Clovis hunters disappeared, and the mammals disappeared, and all it did was analyze the question. But that's not what happened. So passage 2 also analyzes the hypothesis in passage 1, gives its own kind of some of the evidence against it, etc. So B is out. C says that passage 2 discusses possible implications of the central hypothesis summarized in passage 1. Again, this is not correct because this would only be true if passage 2 basically said, okay, let's assume passage 1 is correct, the hypothesis. What would be the implications? Well, then this follows, and this follows, and this would be the consequence of this, etc. But that's not what's happening. Passage 2 is contradicting passage 1, so we should get rid of that. Then we have D, which says that passage 2 identifies evidence in favor of the central hypothesis advanced in passage 1, which is not correct either. Passage 2 is not in favor of the hypothesis of passage 1. It contradicts it, critiques it, so we get rid of D, and that's going to leave us with answer choice A, which is our correct answer for question